Hello and welcome to another episode of the Frankly Leader podcast. And to say I am a little bit giddy with excitement, Tim. I have got Tim Bean on the podcast today. Welcome, Tim.
Well, hello. Giddy with excitement is a bit worrying.
Excitement. So, just to let the cat out of the bag, you and I met at the very beginning of my career.
You did.
And in fact, it's your fault. Your fault that I ended up on the graduate scheme at Vodafone all those years ago because you interviewed me.
I did. It's more than 25 years ago now.
It's
Scary, isn't it?
Go there.
Yes. I did interview you and I can remember it now.
No, yes. That would definitely not be a video I'd want to watch now, for sure. It would definitely not get me on The Apprentice, that's for sure. So, Tim, for people out there that don't know you, I mean, you've had a wonderful career, and I'm hoping that we're going to unpack some of that on the talk today. But we're meeting you at a kind of like later end of career, not the end yet, but later end. So you've just recently stepped away from being CEO for VSN International,
Yes.
you've really enjoyed.
Yes,
and you're in
time.
a kind of break period, resourcing yourself to step into a more advisory phase of your career. Is that fair?
That's right. Yeah, I really enjoyed the time with VSNI and I still remain connected to them in some capacity. But I reached a stage in my life where, for me, and also reflecting on the business and thinking, what does the business need as its leader in the next stage of its evolution? It was a good time for me to step away. So I'm very pleased to say that the board in that business looked favourably on that decision as well. And I remain, as I say, in a sort of an advisory capacity to them at this time. But the plan is take a bit of time out, decompress. As you say, I'm towards the end of my career now, but I do like. I've always been a helper of people. I like, being involved in business. So the aim is to take on a few advisory or any NED roles over the next year or so, and so offer some leadership in that capacity.
Yeah, and you'd be brilliant at that. Just really brilliant.
Very kind of you to say.
Yeah, you're one of the good eggs. And I know I'm going to start in a different place today because I know in your last role in particular, you had quite like the Frankly podcast is about putting people and planet alongside profit, and I know that's something that's important to you.
Yeah,
and was the last business that you came from. So, in that role, were you having a lot of conversations around climate change at a board level?
At a board level, probably not as much as at an executive management level. But certainly, when I joined that business, very, good business, very well established, very strong pedigree. It was a business involved in analytical software. But I think the key thing that struck me was that the software that we were selling was being used by people to solve some of the significant problems that are facing the world, not least sustainable food supply. And everybody knew that, but it hadn't kind of been galvanized as the overarching reason for being. If you like, you Simon Sinek, why are you here? It was that. So starting to think about that and starting to think about why do our customers use our product moved you away a little bit from just thinking so much about the product to thinking about the utility of it. And that gave a sort of an identity. And as we looked at what our vision should be and our values should be as the business was transforming, respect was one of the values, and respect for, our people, our customers, and our planet. I probably got that wrong, but certainly our planet was part of it. Brought to life the fact that businesses have to be sustainable, and the vision of the business was to be using technology and data to solve the problems of sustainable food supply.
Yeah, and that whole sustainable food supply topic, I think, is really interesting because I don't think people realise that's what a big threat it is to us.
Well, I'll get the stats slightly wrong, but I think if you look at the UN figures, we're going to be at something like 10 billion people by 2050. Wherever people stand on climate change, whether they think it's mumbo jumbo or it's really serious and real, the planet is changing in a way that is reducing the amount of available land for the production of food. We're producing food in a way that doesn't use the calories that are produced as effectively and as efficiently as possible. But the
Overworking.
simple equation is there's going to be more people than we can feed as a planet.
Yeah.
And I think that will bring, the risk is that brings some serious sort of socio-political issues. Crikey, I can't believe I'm talking about this. But
Mm.
it could, some of the things that we think we're facing now are as but nothing to what we could be facing in 20 years' time.
Yeah. And that I think that's the other thing. Like it's not that far away. I think a lot of people kind of console themselves that it won't be in our lifetime. It's
Yeah.
like actually it is quite near. Like it's a lot nearer than what I think people think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're sitting in the UK at the minute. It's been raining for 6 weeks, and some might say, "Well, that's not unusual." And you go, well, it is for it to be constantly raining for that amount of time. The world, stuff's changing. We see all the big events around the place, and climate, of course, is the environment. It's not weather is the fact it's raining, but it's the climate that's allowing that to happen.
Yeah.
I think of it as I've always been a bit of I like an analogy. It helps people understand things. But for those people who've seen Independence Day, the film Independence Day, there's that moment where the telephones stop working, TV screens start to crackle, blah blah blah, because the aliens are out there just gradually gathering,
Uh,
getting themselves sorted, and you don't see them until one day the big ship sort of turns up, and in my head, that's how I see climate change. That it's all happening, but we're just not looking at it, and we need to.
yeah. And that leads me on to the next question really nicely, which
Mm.
is, this at a leadership level in particular, that topic of where do you and how do you prioritize sustainability into a business. So like we've seen recently, so we're recording this in early 2026, and obviously we see things that happen in America. People go, oh right, well let's stop our diversity and inclusion then because they've stopped it over there, we'll have to stop it here. And that kind of like the climate conversation moves up and down the priority list. The ESG
Yes.
movement moves up and down the priorities. Based on what we've just said, what do you think gets in the way of leaders having more conversations and prioritizing sustain? Oh, bang to my head.
Yeah, well, I think in some ways the way that you've just posed the question answers it as well. I think we're very short term in our thinking, and that's not me being critical. I've been there myself, where you think you're almost prioritizing what's going to deliver the results for the next quarter or for the next year, and it can be hard to step back from that and do make decisions that are longer term, even if they've got nothing to do with climate and sustainability.
Yeah.
But I think you have to just keep bringing it back to that point that says, look, again, I sound like I'm a massive supporter of Simon Sinek here. To some extent, I am. But he talks about how being successful in business, I'm paraphrasing, is staying in business. It's not about winning; it's about maintaining a business and being there. And you're providing a service, you're providing employment, you're doing good things in the community, all of that good stuff. It doing that in a sustainable way will have to become part of how businesses operate, because otherwise the environment, and I don't just mean the climate environment, but the whole environment in which they operate will just become so difficult to operate in that the old way of doing things just won't make sense. And it's really, this is true of, I think, of our politics. It's really hard to bring a very complex situation to life. So to be able to just say, right, so we'll do this and we'll do this and we'll do this, because it's so interdependent, it's so intertwined on many other things. And so if you're leading a business, or you're leading a group of people in any respect, it's there's always a sort of a propensity to come back to the short term. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we've got to try and break away from a little bit. I was watching a video yesterday. Can't remember the name of the chap. He was reviewing an electric vehicle. Right, so I'm in the market for changing car, and this particular model, he said, this company have absolutely got sustainability right. and everything that they do. It's front and center in the way that they design everything. And you go, yeah, the cynic in me goes, well, that's good for sales. And probably it is. But then he went on to say he's of an age like I am. I've got a son in his early 20s, and his generation care about that stuff so much more than ours do, and they place so much more emphasis on a company's sustainability credentials than perhaps some of us olds who have been around the block and are maybe still operating in the old paradigm, appreciate. So
Yeah.
that really struck me that it's not just a cynical marketing exercise. It actually is important.
Yeah, it is important. And I
So
think,
as part of whilst I'm not setting myself up by any means to be, the bastion of all things good practice sustainability, I'm sure part of the advisory roles that I'd look to take would help broker some of those conversations in those boardrooms.
someone's got to keep the conversation prioritized, haven't they? I think at the moment, like until it becomes so fully integrated as a priority that you can't get away from it, you've got to have that voice that's willing to keep putting their hand up somewhere important, where the decision
Yeah,
is made to say, what would the planet have us do? Like back to your point about your values and respecting the planet. If we were making a decision for the planet, what would the planet have us do?
you made me think of something. That whether this is hypocritical or otherwise, I don't know. But people always talk about Google having that empty chair in their meetings, which is
Yeah,
the customer. I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
Google. So maybe there should be two empty chairs. You got the customer and the planet.
Well, I
And
looked at that advert where they said they created a caricature, didn't they, for someone representing the planet, and they gave them a seat at their table. And Patagonia, obviously, they've signed over their whole entire business to the planet through a law firm, so it's in ownership of the planet, which I think is incredibly
that's fantastic.
isn't
I
it?
didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Amazing.
But I think, sorry, last thing I'd say on the subject of what gets in the way for leaders is that I really don't think, and I don't want to go off on a political, get sidetracked politically, but in a lot of the democracies around the world, they're set up in a way that creates short-termism. If you look at, we're in the UK, you look at our situation, we have to have an election at least every 5 years. And we've got largely things are getting a bit more interesting at the moment, but largely a two-party state where it's gone from when I was a kid. I remember it being a much more ideological politics, and it seems to be about just staying in power now. So things will be done and said or not done and said to maintain power. And you go, I think, why is that? Because surely the point of having power is that you can do something with it. Just having it for its sake is pointless. So I'm saying that's why I think that we're not taking as seriously at a government level everything to do with climate change and sustainability. We talk about it, and some nice things are done, and that's good. But it's not. It really isn't as serious as I think it should be. And I think until governments really do grasp it, and as you say, we're sitting in a world where at the moment our friends in the US are, the leadership there is in climate denial, drill baby drill, and it's difficult. It's really difficult. But meanwhile, that big alien spaceship is
It's coming.
moving forward and
Coming.
gathering its position. People think I'm nuts.
I'm going to change topics slightly
Yeah,
and take you back to the beginning. So you've obviously had a wonderfully long career
and
in many new,
eclectic career.
and I was just trying to be mindful then and sensitive. I don't want to call you old, Tim.
Well, you're in the minority then.
Well, you've had a great career and you've done many leadership roles. And when you were young, when you were thinking about what you were going to do when you grew up, did you ever think, I'm going to be a leader one day?
That's that's an interesting question. I don't. I've always sort of assumed leadership roles, and that's not out of. It's not out of a sense of I think I'm a great leader and therefore I'll be in charge or anything like that. It's that I've got this massive sense of responsibility that is I'm the person who fills the gap if there's silence. If we need a volunteer and no one says anything, eventually it's me. And it's that sense of responsibility to, I suppose, to others. That sounds very grand, but I was brought up with that. It was instilled into me. And I guess if you exhibit that sense of wanting to take or feeling you need to take on responsibility, sooner or later it turns into leadership.
Mm.
And I think that's sort of what happened. I my very first job after leaving uni, and I'd started within a week of my last exam, was selling cars, which I did really because it gave me a car to drive around to get another job. But while you're doing it, you've got to earn the money, be successful in what you're doing. And that is very much a drop in at the deep end type job. Here's here are the punters, go and sell cars to them. There's not a lot of management support, and then they're long days and long weeks, and there's a lot of time where you're doing nothing. So unless you display a degree of self leadership and sort of create a bit of structure to what you're doing yourself, you'd collapse in that. And I struggled after a couple of months. I really struggled. Unfortunately, I found another job that had more structure around it. But I think that was the first time I sort of realised that good leadership's important. And then I went through what I would call a number of management roles. And I think the older you get, the more you realise that being a manager isn't being a leader; it's being a manager, and the two things are quite different. And management is organisation, managing resources, managing people, but you're not usually setting the agenda. You're usually you're playing somebody else's tune. And you and I met in one of the large telcos, and I suppose that was where I probably had the first significant, what I'd perhaps call leadership, heading up the CRM function there. But you're still a tiny cog, although everybody in your function is looking to you for leadership. That was just it felt like trying to broker what on earth are we going to do against all of these other competing priorities and things that everybody else wants to do. And that's a degree of leadership in its own right. You still got to create clarity and direction for people. But I think I sort of stumbled into it rather than I always thought I want to be that.
Yeah.
Interestingly, at the time, I won't use names, but at the time that I interviewed you to be on the graduate scheme, I also interviewed somebody who, when I asked about why they wanted to work in that business, they said, I really rather like the idea of sort of sitting there with the Financial Times and plotting, which sort of takeovers and business mergers we could undertake. And I thought, right, there's an element of leadership there, but you've probably got a little bit more to do before then. So suffice to say, that particular candidate didn't get a tick from me.
Well, I'm going to spend the day trying to guess who that is now as well.
Well, you won't know. Well, you might remember them, but they never made it into the business. They weren't selected.
Okay. Quite right.
Yeah.
So with your being on the other side, looking back over your career now, when you think of the word leader, what does that mean to you? What's your interpretation of the word leader?
Yeah. So just this morning before we spoke, I thought, do you know what? To be a leader, you need followers, and and that when we've spoken in the past year, a dictator can be a leader,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got followers who are committed to the cause. It just got people who are frightened not to be. So it just got me thinking about it again. But I think in essence, real leadership is about understanding what it is that you and your group are trying to achieve, planning how best you think strategically you can achieve it, telling that story. And I think storytelling is such an important part of leadership. So people can clearly understand the vision. We're going over there. It'll look like this. The reason we're doing it is for all of these good things. And, there'll be tough times and there'll be good times, but, we get rallied behind it and we're all going there. And you've got to inspire people to think, yeah, that's worth doing. Because usually there's a bit of pain to be taken along the way. It's never plain sailing. But if you can keep people focused on the why and the how, then the what sort of falls out. And I think it's really important as well as a leader to create the environment that just allows everybody else to be as successful as they can be. And it's tempting, particularly in smaller businesses where you might be, an SME in the UK, you might have 20 or 50 people or whatever. You can kind of be involved in everything, and there's a temptation to be involved in everything. And I think you really have to drag yourself out of the weeds and stay focused on where we're going and how we're going to get there, rather than trying to solve everybody's problem today. That just
Yeah.
does not, that is that. If I was to say there's one thing that I would to aspirational leaders is you're not letting people down if you let them solve their problems themselves.
Yeah.
You're enabling them to
Yeah.
become bigger, better people who will solve it. I forget who it was, but it was somebody around the time that we first knew each other, and I was sort of moving into my first kind of proper leadership role. Um, and they just said, when someone comes to you with an issue, just ask them what they do.
Mm,
And 9 times out of 10, what they do is probably what you do, or if it isn't exactly what you do, it would be a good thing. So, and
yeah.
let them do it. And eventually, they stop asking because they get the confidence of thinking, well,
I can
Tim's
do this.
happy for me to do my thing.
Yeah.
So, and that can feel like absolving yourself of responsibility. And well, maybe in some respects it is, but as the leader, you're accountable for everything.
Yeah.
So, if you're giving responsibility to others, give them the chance to actually flourish with it, rather than I want you to do this and I want you to do it like this.
Yeah.
That's for AI.
I'm a big fan of that. The only open program I run is coaching skills for leaders, which is exactly to that point that you just said. Leave the doing where the doing needs to be done, and help your
Yeah.
people feel good about that they did it. With your encouragement, your support, a few clever coaching questions, you can unlock so much potential
Mm.
and keep your to-do list a lot shorter by not micromanaging everybody.
So one of what you'll know this guy, Kevin Taylor. So he was one of my he headed up one of the departments I worked in. I worked directly for him and managed strategy for him. And it was the first sort of role where strategy had been all I did. And he spotted fairly early on that I was struggling with what the hell. I'm not doing anything. I felt like I wasn't doing anything because I'd come from this world where you could see everything that came out. You could see the marketing campaign, you could see the product development, you could see whatever it was. In strategy, you were informing others to do stuff,
Yeah.
and he spotted that, and he sort of taught me to measure your output in other ways, because otherwise you'll just get dragged back into the measurable, and you're not in the measurable anymore, Tim. You're in the immeasurable,
Yeah.
and I've never forgotten that. It was a
Really good advice.
salutary lesson.
Yeah. So what do you love about, or what have you loved so far about being a leader? Like, what are the bits that you enjoy?
Um, I like. I'm a bit of a control freak, so I like to be able to set the agenda. Um, and in all honesty, as a leader, you're never really entirely setting the agenda. You're always doing it within a certain framework and with a certain set of parameters. And, there's a board who wants something, or there's a bank who wants something, or whatever. But being able to quickly understand a situation, um, articulate and understand where it is that what is the thing that we're trying to achieve. And I always focus on achieve rather than do, because there's lots of
Mhm.
things we can do,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's an outcome from doing stuff. That's what you've got to stay focused on. So identifying that, and then creating the environment where you start moving towards that, and you start seeing the success and the failures, because you get those as well, of moving towards something. I love seeing teams come together.
Mm,
I really do. Taking a group of people who often are very friendly with each other, but they don't work together in a cohesive, supportive way. The way and again, you'll appreciate this, you'll have seen this, particularly in some of the big companies over the years. I describe it as, instead of it being like a game of ping pong, where you're hitting the ball back over the net to the other department again, and then they hit it back at you, and then they hit it back, and it's competitive. It's more like basketball, where you're throwing the ball around to each other. But you've all got that sense that at some point in time we're throwing this to each other because one of us is going to put it in that net, and then we're all successful.
Yeah.
And I think if you can move to, helping people move away from the ping pong to the basketball,
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor.
Yeah, and being somebody who assumes responsibility to then have it relatively uncumbered is good.
Yeah. And what about the flip side then? What did you find hardest?
Almost the same thing, having the responsibility. It can be a lonely place, depending on where you are and what you're doing. It can be a lonely place, and there are, you're often burdened with knowledge that you can't share with others for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it might be something that's going on that's would affect a share price, for example. So it's sensitive information, or you might be looking at reorganisations or whatever. There's often stuff that you think, oh, I'd love to be able to talk to somebody about this, but I can't. And you have to trust your judgment. And if I was to say, I think it took me a long time, and it's maybe experience, to go, most of the time, Tim, your judgment's not far off. You're pretty good. And I probably procrastinated too much in my earlier and mid-career because I was worried about getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And often then waiting means you do get it wrong because the world's moved on.
Yeah.
So I think you have to trust yourself, and that can be hard. But there are ways that you can find that trusted confidant. So that's good. I think as well, you do have those, well, I certainly have those dark hour moments where you think, oh, we're really doing the right thing here? Is this really the right thing? And the way I reconcile that is, I'm currently in Leicester, you're up in York area, in the UK. Well, if my objective is to get from here to York, then I can set out with a plan to do it. But things will go wrong along the way, and you have to divert course and do other things. But ultimately, you'll get to your destination. And I think those things, when it can feel like there's a problem, or we've done the wrong thing, whatever, it's just if you reframe it as, no, we've just got to take a slightly different route now, then it feels better.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually one of the skills that we're seeing increasingly becoming more important for leaders, is that capacity to be agile, because the world is changing at such a pace, and like you say, Independence Day is coming, and that's meaning like you can be on a trajectory and then suddenly like, oh God, we need to pivot. Oh God, we need to pivot. So yeah, setting out and being able to be agile, staying focused, to your point about what you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to get to. Yeah, and do you think...
And the good thing about sorry, Jen, I'm cutting in, but I think the good thing about focusing on what you're trying to achieve is that if it's more of a vision than particularly an end state, then you can keep moving towards it. You don't, because otherwise the risk is, I know you hear a lot about elite sports people who focus on, we're in the middle of the Winter Olympics at the moment, it's winning that Olympic gold. And then when they've won it, they haven't got anywhere else to go. And it can, a lot of people, they really struggle with that. A lot of them, many others don't. They just go and do it again and again and again. But so making it you almost don't know when you've got there, but you always know that you're on the journey to it. And there are milestones and markers along the way that give you evidence and proof and comfort that things are good. But it's back to the Simon Sinek thing, staying in business is, it's critical. You won't achieve anything if you go out of business. So just being in business is a success in its own right.
Yeah. And we're touching on it. So the next question is around, looking more to the future. and thinking about how leadership is having to change to adjust to the world that we're now operating out of, and those threats that are coming out, threats and opportunities that are coming our way. What do you think the qualities and skills are that leaders need to be really focusing on in terms of their behaviours that's going to keep them sharp as a leader for the future?
Yeah. Well, I think you've mentioned agility, and that certainly is one of them because stuff changes so quick. I think having a keen radar as to what's going on in your market, well, your business, your market, your country, the political, the economic side of things. I think much more so now than probably ever before, and because stuff is changing so fast, and that can either, that change can either bring risk or opportunity, and you need to kind of be understanding what that is, and how you're going to manage that in your particular circumstance. But overall, whilst ever people are involved in businesses, and we mentioned AI very briefly earlier on, but the AI will start to have an impact in the way things are done, and that will have an impact on people. But I think if you can remain very focused on what makes people tick at a group level, at an individual level, um, and have the ability to harness and get the most out of the people resources that you've got, I think that'll be hugely important. Hugely important.
Yeah.
So sharpen up those EQ skills,
Yeah.
and focus on
Yeah.
that, I'd say.
And it's that like there's so much untapped potential sitting in organisations, aren't there, in terms of the talent? How do leaders
Hugely.
become better coaches? How do they become better trainers? How do they become better at kind of unlocking those talents? Getting good with psychology, I think. Yeah. So obviously, don't want to put
I
myself
think
out.
there are some simple things that that are it's worth remembering, and often we get wrapped up in the complication of things, and then you have to just step back and go, hang on, there's some simple stuff here.
Yeah.
Nobody gets out of bed and goes to work to do a bad job.
No.
That's not their intention when they jump out of bed in the morning. So if things aren't working properly, it's usually not because of somebody, it's because of something environmental or procedural or whatever it is. And involving the people who are doing the do in the definition of the how, that involvement is huge. It means, first of all, it probably means you'll get a better solution, a better outcome, because you're actually using the brains that really understand. But also, people become invested in that outcome because they brought something of themselves to that
Yeah.
decision and that process, and they want to do it. There's an I won't mention who they were, but I took over a team at an organisation once, and they were really, it was only a small team that were very browbeaten individuals. They were at the wrong end of a bad process, so they soaked up all of the problems.
Mm.
The deadlines never moved, and they were the ones who were trying to do it all in last minute, and they were basically being told how to do their job by everybody. And I think the first thing that I had to do was to provide air cover for them, and it was that we just started asking everybody why. Well, why do you want them to do that? Why? And eventually, the organisation realised that actually what it needed to do was focus on the outcomes it was trying to achieve, and then let this particular team design the activities that would deliver those.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went from having a team that were stressed with each other, stressed themselves, and who would turn up on time and go home on time, to being much more engaged with each other, much more engaged with the organisation, and much more willing. And I never measure success by the amount of time people put in, but it is an indicator that where people are prepared to just stay that extra half hour or whatever because they want to get something done, it's because they're invested in it.
Yeah.
And that's a people thing. That's it's all about people in that respect.
Mm. And you've
But I do think that as AI starts to really bite, I don't think we're there yet, but when it really starts to bite, leaders have got a challenge as to how does that integrate into the way a business works, and what does that mean for the people who are still in the business? And there's probably a lot of reskilling, not least in how to utilize AI to its best end for a business, but a lot of reskilling for people to keep them in, to keep them in employment.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up on something moving into the next question, which is around support, because you mentioned earlier about the loneliness of being a leader, and that you are both privileged but also isolated in a lot of the decisions that you have to get involved in. So in terms of like resourcing leaders well, like what's your view or advice around like what support structures do you put in place around leaders to help them be the best that they can be?
To some extent, you say, well, you would say this, Tim, wouldn't you, given the direction you're going in? But I think using trusted advisors is really helpful. And, I've been on a number of boards over the years. And interestingly, one of them being a charitable organisation, sitting in on the board meetings of a charitable organisation. And the people who are not in the day-to-day are the ones who really can help keep you on the right path, that ask the right questions, and provide the sort of support. And I was going to say the sort of support that will help you be successful. That's why they're there. They don't, most of them are not there to try and trip you up or do anything. They want to see the business be successful, whether their motivation is that they're a shareholder or they're a trustee of a charity because they've got a vested interest in the charity. They want to see a successful operation. And so if you can work well with those people, that can be a really good support. I think putting the right... Kevin Taylor, he's cropping up again. Here we go. He once walked into my office when you and I worked together with a Post-it note, and he stuck it on my screen of my computer, and it said control. And so I looked at him and he said, that's what you need to think about, is how are you controlling things? You can be doing things, how are you controlling? You need your controls in place to make sure that things are moving in the right direction. So again, that's not about telling people what to do or how to do it. To some extent, it is about making sure that people remain focused on things, accountable for things. But you can't make someone accountable unless you give them all the tools to deliver against that accountability. And I think, that's critical too. But if you've got the right communications in place within an organisation, and communication is massive, I should say, by the way, we've not touched on that. But as a leader, if you can't communicate with others, you're really on a bit of a hiding to nothing. I mentioned storytelling earlier on, but you've got to be able to talk in a way that eradicates ambiguity. People know what it is that you're talking. You and I, before we were having a little chat earlier on, and somebody had said, "Oh, I'm now involved in X, Y, Z," and we looked at each other and went, "What on earth's X, Y, Z?"
Yeah.
Sounded very flash, but we didn't really know what it meant. And so I think you've got to get those things right as well.
Yeah, getting on the same page.
Yeah, and these days, in the last business that I worked in, back to the sustainability thing, we were remote. We had people all over the world, but post-COVID, we never went back to the office. We didn't need to, and that's good for the environment. It's good for people because they got a much more flexible way of doing the job, and we all felt that was good. What it did mean is that if you're the leader of a remote team, you've got to think differently.
Yeah.
You do things differently. And I'm not, if any of those people are watching this, they might say, well, you didn't do a very good job of that, did you? Who knows? But you have to, it'd be so easy to sit there being engrossed in a computer in front of yourself. You have to find reasons to go and check in with people.
You do.
And make sure that more importantly, that they can always check in with you if they want to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
that's lovely. That's like the question was about what support do leaders need, but what you've actually said is like leaders do need support, but they also need to be generative with their support for their team as well and supporting them.
Absolutely. But I know for myself, and this others may recognise this. I take left on my own. I'm a dangerous individual.
Mhm.
I get my energy from others,
Yeah.
and talking to people sparks ideas and sparks thoughts, and that's where good stuff can come from. That's where crazy stuff can come from as well.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I remember, I won't mention the name of the individual, but I used to sit in an office with somebody who was the most creative person I've ever worked with, ever. And that person would come up with 20 ideas a day. And I think, I wish I could come up with all those ideas, but I'm a complete finisher. I get things done. But they would come up with all of these ideas, and like 20 ideas, 18 were bonkers, two were worth probably taking forward. And at the end of the week, you've got 10 ideas, of which two or three are actually really good, and you can carry them forward. You can do stuff, but you know that just comes from, well, it was larking about most of the time, but that comes from just chatting and talking about stuff, and then suddenly sparks happen. You can't do that sat on your own. I do completely believe that you can run a business remotely, but you do need to have some face-to-face human connectivity, particularly to establish relationships that are then easier to maintain remotely. But there's you the spark of human beings being together in the same place is quite powerful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that is, I find that supportive, because when you've got those lonely things, just having a conversation with somebody about something completely different could answer
Yes.
your lonely dark night moment.
And I ask everybody to tell me what question I'm missing and that I need to add to my list. And yours is brilliant, so I'm going to ask it to you.
I'm glad you can remember it.
And it was, what's the biggest mistake you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Oh wow!
Your
How long
question.
have we got for this? How long have we got for this pocket? Yeah, great to ask the question. I haven't actually thought about what the answer would be. Um, Biggest mistake. I've made some silly practical mistakes, and that was just through not paying attention when I was younger. But I would say, as a lead, this is about leadership. As leadership, I'm not going to say one particular thing, but I think it comes down to failing to act quickly enough, and often what needs to be done, and sometimes that can be difficult things. It might be difficult conversations you've got to have with people. Sometimes it might mean, that you part ways with that individual. It can be, it's the sort of things that it's easy to leave to tomorrow, and they keep, and I think I said earlier on, I think you have to go through a sort of, to a certain extent, go through the motion of acting in that way to learn that actually that's not the way to be. And that don't procrastinate, get a clear thing, act, do it. Rarely, to the point that I would say, I think, I can't think of an instance, rarely do you do something and it is a disaster. You might make a decision that was, with hindsight, was probably not the best, but it's not irrecoverable. It's back to the, how do I get from Leicester to Leeds? Well, you perhaps shouldn't have turned left at Nottingham.
Yeah.
But you can still find your way back. I'm desperately racking my brain to think if there is a particular thing. I'll keep thinking.
Keep thinking. So the last question, either retrospectively or even now, because you're at this career break, if you could do any job in the world and you had the talent and the skills and the capacity, the opportunity, what is that dream job for you?
Oh wow. I'd really like to do. I had dinner with my brother the other night, and we were talking about this, and we both said we'd really like to be in politics in
Oh.
some respect, but we both knew that our characters wouldn't allow us to be successful in politics,
Yeah.
because I haven't got a thick skin. I am a sensitive little soul, and also, I think I'm going to use the word integrity, because we haven't used it yet, and I think it's a really critical thing for leaders to have. because integrity is one of those things. It's quite hard to describe, but it's really easy to see if people have got it or they haven't got it. And if you've got integrity as a leader, people will believe you, even if they don't really, they might have some reservations about what you're saying or what you're doing. They trust your integrity, and that's massive. I'm not. Do you know? I think that's something you're born with. I don't think I'm not sure you can necessarily learn it because people would see through it.
Right.
So you either have it or you don't. And if you have it and you try and cover it up, that's even worse. And so in that politics thing, I wouldn't love to run the country, but I'd perhaps like to run a department, maybe a department for climate or energy or something. But I could never do it because I'd be found out for my honesty far too quick.
But don't you think that's what politics needs? It's
I
having
do think it's what politics needs.
it needs
I
a
suspect there's
approach.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of people like me and my brother around the place. And I'm not sitting here saying I'd be a great politician
Yeah.
by any means, but you do look at it and you go, the way we've got to stop playing ping pong and start playing basketball in politics.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that is what is required. But, I think something significant needs to change in the way our political system works for that to perhaps open up a door for me somewhere. But
Still time.
I tell you, I always used to say when I was younger that if I won the lottery, I wouldn't be one of those people who could just sit there spending money. I'd find that quite hard to do. I need to do something, so I'd buy a recording studio. So I love my music. You can see from the stuff that's on there. I'd buy a recording studio. The thing is now, you don't need a recording studio to be a musician. Most you can do it in your bedroom
Yeah.
very successfully. So that ship has sailed, I'm afraid.
Well, you could bring vintage back.
Yes, maybe.
Well,
Got my ukulele. I'm not getting it out.
I was going to mention it. I was going to mention
Yes, yeah, and that's not a euphemism, everybody. It really is a ukulele. Look, here it is.
Yeah, sure.
Here's the said ukulele.
I think you should play us out with a little ditty.
I can't. I think that would just see your ratings plummet, Jen, and I wouldn't want to do that to you.
Oh, well, I think my ratings are going to soar off the back of this conversation on its own.
Oh, I hope so. That's very kind of you.
Want to say thank you again for giving up your time and sharing your wisdom so vulnerably and honestly and with your integrity. And yeah, I just love our conversations. I'm so glad we've stayed in touch. So thank you.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you.
There are those people that I think is another leadership thing. Get the right people around you.
Yeah.
Get people around you who you believe in and who you can trust. And I think as you go through your career, you meet people and you work with people who are on your mental list of, if I could build my perfect team, they'd be in it. And I'm not flattering you, Jen, but you're on that list.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Thank you. You've made my day. I don't know how to sign off now. Well, thank you.
How about goodbye? That's
goodbye.
Yeah, great to talk to you.
You too.
We'll speak.